My name is Quentin Scott. I am the Federal Policy Director at Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I'll be your host for this conversation about the Farm Bill. If you are here to learn more about the Farm Bill and how the Farm Bill can be used to tackle the climate crisis, you have definitely shown up to the right place. But before we get into our conversation, I have a few quick housekeeping items. If you would like to enable closed captioning, please go to the More tab at your bottom right, and then select Show Captions, and then it'll auto-generate closed captioning. If there's at any point you have a question, please use the Q&A function and drop your question into that function, and we'll do our best to answer any questions. And then finally, we are recording today's conversation. We're going to post it to YouTube, and we're going to send a follow-up email to everyone who has attended here today. And it also include some of the information that you'll see throughout the presentations. And so it'll be all in one place so you can refer to it later. So those are our quick housekeeping. So let's get into it. So according to the Boston Consulting Group, agriculture has the potential to produce a third of US greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And here's why. Bold investments in policies that target emissions in every other sector of the economy, especially transportation and energy, are expected to sharply reduce emissions. However, emissions from agriculture will likely remain steady without action. The good news, we have an opportunity right in front of us. This is a huge moment, and I'm so excited to talk with our panelists today about what this Farm Bill could mean and what the path ahead looks like as we make our way closer to a sustainable future. We'll talk about what's in the Farm Bill, what we need to be fighting for and against, and what all this means for our farmers on the front lines. We are so glad to have our friends joining us today who have been leading this fight to help us understand the Farm Bill and the potential landscape we face. But before we get into it, let's do a quick introduction of each of our panelists. Matea Mirkusic, Senior Energy Transition Policy Lead at Evergreen Action. Her policy research focuses on climate, clean energy, and a swift and just transition away from fossil fuels. Prior to joining Evergreen, Matea worked as a journalist reporting on climate crisis from Cabasas, Nepal, and the US. Matea has also worked for the United Nations Development Program, Equator Initiative, Refugees International, and Climate Law and Policy. Matea had earned a degree in Environmental Studies and Human Rights at Harvard University and was a Rhodes Scholar to University of Oxford, where she studied a Master's of Public Policy and a Master's of Refugee and Forced Migration Studies. Matea, thank you for joining us. It's glad to see you.
Thanks so much, Quentin. And I'm really excited to be here with you all. Even though I spend a lot of my time behind a screen these days thinking about federal policy, sustainable farming is kind of actually one of the reasons I got into this work. I grew up in Tamaki Makaurau, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and my grandfather worked in an olive and lemon farm well into his 80s. So he's really the person who hooked me into this fight. And so while I'm far away from that orchard now, I'm really excited to talk to you all about farming and justice and climate and learn from the fellow panelists today.
Awesome. Our next panelist is Jeff Horsfield, Policy Director at Environmental Working Group. Jeff works on policies to make food more sustainable and healthier, including touching on alternative proteins like plant-based meat. Prior to joining EWG, he worked in government affairs at the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and interned in the office of Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. Jeff has also served at AmeriCorps with their AIDS United in Durham, North Carolina, and as a volunteer coordinator for Carolina Tiger Rescue. Jeff holds a bachelor's degree from Gettysburg College and a master's degree in public policy from the College of William and Mary. Jeff, welcome.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. Again, I look forward to hearing as well from the group and from the panelists and getting to talk about the Farm Bill. And, it's so exciting to see, as somebody who's now this is only my second Farm Bill, but been in the farming weeds on this. It's so exciting to see other groups and advocates like folks on this call be interested and start to recognize, right, that the climate crisis is going to involve agriculture and food, and to start to take action on this.
Couldn't agree more, Jeff. Our next panelist, Espy Ortega Tapia, a sustainable agriculture advocate and research assistant. Espy recently earned a Master's of Science degree in geography and a graduate certificate in GIS from George Washington University. She additionally holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Geography and American Studies from GW. Originally from New Mexico, her research interests mainly lie in sustainable, equitable food systems and the intersection of community, climate change, and agricultural policy. Espy is passionate about initiating conversations and actions and empower BIPOC voices in advanced research in GIS and related fields. And I'll add that Espy was also a CCAN fellow at a point in time. So welcome back, Espy. Glad to be with you again.
Hi, thank you so much, Quentin. I am so excited to be part of this conversation. It really is an honor. Sustainable and equitable food systems have been a large part of my life and interest in my research studies, but recently it was this year that I really delved into the Farm Bill. My recent research project for my capstone was about the Farm Bill and understanding its impact on equity. And I continue to do research with the Global Food Institute to examine the impact of climate change on agriculture and local businesses. So I am very excited to have this conversation, and thank you so much for everyone who joined today. I'm excited.
All right. Our next panelist, Chanika Forte, farmer and founder of Heart and Soul People's Garden. Chanika Forte is an influential advocate for sustainable agriculture and food security. With 10 years in agriculture in Arizona, she serves as the urban farmer manager at St. Vincent de Paul's Urban Farm on the Human Service Campus in Phoenix, where she also coordinates community involvement across 3 urban farms. Nikia is the owner and lead instructor at ABC Mobile Education Center, a mobile education initiative focused on engaging low-income communities in sustainable practices in food production. She also founded the Bayhive Beekeeper Training Program, which empowers women of color through beekeeping, teaching sustainability and sisterhood. In collaboration with nonprofit Local First Arizona, Nikia manages the Heart and Soul People's Garden. This initiative enhances community engagement and supports women growers by providing access to garden plots and educational programs. Chanika, it is a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. Yes, my name is Nika Forte. I'm excited to be here. I just came back from DC a couple weeks ago, where we advocated for the Farm Bill as a fly-in. I was a fly-in participant, so I'm really excited to further this discussion with others in the agriculture realm. Even though I may not be in the policy part, I'm very much in the hands-on direct service business. And so I'm glad that I'm able to discuss kind of what we're doing in the urban farm spaces that I am managing and facilitating at this time. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. We're excited to hear more about your story. Our final panelist, Latoya Adams, who owns and operates the Adams Family Farm. Latoya is a Kansas native, wife and mother of 2 young adults. She is a BIPOC beginning farmer. Latoya and her family started their farm 4 years ago. She saw a need for fresh produce within her community and wanted to fill that need. She lobbied for the Farm Bill to share her voice on what the Farm Bill looks like for her farm and her family and community. She is a student at Kansas State University. She is a doula and a spa owner that has paired all 3 of her companies together with farm, spa, and doula services to teach her community about detoxing the body to aid in the neutral healing of the body. She feels fresh food should be affordable and available for everyone. Her farm motto is "Fresh Grows Here." Nice to meet you, Latoya. If you're talking, you're on mute. Okay, seems like we have some technical difficulties with Latoya, but we'll get that straightened out.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was saying thank you for having me. You have a really wonderful panel, and I'm glad to be here to share more about the Farm Bill and the work that we've done on Capitol Hill in the last month. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, so let's get into the conversation. Matea, in the coming weeks, Congress is going to vote on a monumental federal farm bill. This is an opportunity that only comes about twice a decade. And no matter what happens, a bill will pass. So we need to take advantage of this opportunity to move forward on our climate goals. Will you talk to us about why this farm bill is important and the opportunity for climate action?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Quentin. Yeah, so I wanted to pick up on something that you said. You mentioned that the Farm Bill only comes around twice a decade. And that's a really good reminder because it kind of asks us to zoom out our perspective here, right? After this year's Farm Bill, the next Farm Bill will likely be debated in 2029 or 2030. And if you're a climate nerd like I am, you know that 2030 is this loaded date, right? With kind of big red letters stamped on it because it's the due date for our national climate goals. And by then, we're going to have to slash our country's climate pollution in half at the very least. So it's really time to kind of put our shoulder to the wheel for climate action. And we have to do that across every legislative and executive opportunity we have, including, of course, the Farm Bill. And as you may know, greenhouse gas emissions from the US agriculture sector currently make up around 10% of our country's climate pollution. That comes from like methane due to livestock, nitrous oxide from fertilizer overuse, carbon dioxide from fossil fuel combustion from various different equipment, and more. And the fact is that the status quo of our current agricultural practices are often degrading our land, our biodiversity, our climate, and also often come at the expense of the health of farm workers too. And if this is left unchecked, I think, as you mentioned, Quentin, our nation's agricultural sector will make up around a third of the climate pollution by 2020 if trends keep on continuing this way. So, all of this is to say, done right, the Farm Bill could equip farmers with funding to help tackle a portion of climate pollution from the ag sector. So we need to get this right. We simply don't have 5 years. I also want to pause here and say that though I'm going to be talking mostly about the climate dimensions today, I want to also acknowledge that 5 years is an unacceptably long time to functionally slash SNAP funding. And I'm really excited to hear from my fellow panelists today to hear how important it is to protect SNAP funding in this Farm Bill. Okay, so let's talk a little bit how we implement climate action in this Farm Bill. And I'd argue kind of one of our best strategies here is protecting the IRA climate smart guardrails. You'll notice that I said kind of protect as opposed to advance an entirely new raft of climate policy. And that's because it's one of the biggest things we can do at this point, given the makeup of this Congress. It's to protect hard-fought and genuinely historic wins that were secured back in 2022. So what do I mean by that? Basically, 2 years ago, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act. And of course, the IRA had its flaws, but it was also one of the largest climate investments in our country's history. And as you probably know, as part of the IRA, Congress decided to provide $19.5 billion, which is so much money, to the US Department of Agriculture for farmers to keep participating in these wildly popular and oversubscribed conservation programs. Now, crucially, this funding came with a catch. The catch essentially was that the new funding for these programs needed to be directed to practices that had the highest value for the climate. If you've been following the Farm Bill news coverage, this is what's called the climate smart guardrails. So here's the great news. Climate smart conservation programs are popular with farmers. They are already being used. They put money in farmers' pockets. And crucially, if they're designed right, they slash climate pollution while also improving biodiversity, increasing soil health and water quality. But unfortunately, here's where the rubber's kind of hitting the road. So 2 weeks ago, Republican House Ag Chair G.T. Thompson proposed a House Farm Bill that does put the $19.5 billion into the baseline of the Farm Bill. But he also wants to remove the climate smart guardrails, thus removing the bulk of these climate benefits. And, we really can't afford to go backwards here, right? I'm sure my colleague Jeff over at EWG will have so much more to say about these climate smart guardrails, but I just wanted to pause here and say this is one of our biggest climate fights in the Farm Bill. Let's see. All right, there we go. So there are a bunch of other issues that are at stake here in the Farm Bill as well when it relates to the climate. And maybe just to name one, we want to make sure that we're promoting rural clean energy infrastructure that's appropriately sited. So after decades of disinvestment, rural communities really deserve to make sure that they can build out clean energy systems that are cheaper than coal and fossil alternatives, while also not polluting, the communities in the same way that coal and fossil fuels have for years and years. But right now, the GOP's House Farm Bill has this provision that would basically stop USDA from providing financial assistance for solar projects that convert 5 acres or more of farmland. And this isn't good. Basically, this curtails an economic opportunity for farmers while also restricting, lower cost energy sources for rural communities. So those are just 2 important climate priorities that I wanted to kind of shout out today, but there are so many more that I'm sure my fellow panelists will also be speaking about. And as a final strategic thought, I just wanted to share one final thing, which is that we're really lucky to have so many farmers across the country as champions for the climate provisions in this Farm Bill. And we also have a champion in Senator Debbie Stabenow, who's the Democratic chair for the Senate Ag Committee. When she recently released a Senate Farm Bill framework a few weeks ago now, she essentially committed to protecting these climate smart guardrails. Where does this kind of leave us as a movement? Well, for us at least, our biggest push is to maintain unity among Democrats in the House and the Senate to reject the Republican House Farm Bill text and to make sure that we're really protecting these vital climate investments. And one of the best ways we can do that is to make sure that we can activate farmers, ranchers, community members, and other stakeholders who are already doing so much in this space and are already raising their voices, but make sure that their voices are being heard by their members of Congress to protect this climate funding. So that's my 2 cents, and really excited to hear from everybody else. Thanks, Quentin.
Thanks, Matea. Jeff, I want to key in on something that Matea just talked about in terms of the climate guardrails for the Farm Bill. Can you expand on that and also talk about what is it actually going to take to pass this long delayed bill?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad we're talking about the guardrails. I think for folks to help understand, right? When we're driving, we have guardrails to keep us on the road, to keep us on the path, and we have to make sure that we protect and maintain these guardrails so that agriculture as a sector, so that the country can stay on the road and not lose our way when it comes to emissions and meeting the climate crisis head on. So when Congress provided this almost $20 billion to the Department of Agriculture or USDA for climate smart farming practices, these guardrails included legislative language that said, this money must go to practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions like nitrous oxide and methane and help build soil carbon. So these types of practices, I'll give some examples in a minute, but these are pretty common conservation practices like cover crops or riparian buffers, things that farmers know and utilize, and taken on a whole, provide the most environmental benefits when implemented. So not just the best practices for climate, it's the best practices for the environment. So it's best practices for reducing, for improving air quality, for improving water quality, for reducing things like nitrogen runoff that contributes to algae blooms that I'm sure folks have heard about or that we see in the news from time to time. So these recent events, right, the growth of algae blooms, the expansion of extreme weather really shows that these guardrails are more important than ever. And they're in much higher demand from farmers and ranchers across the country too. So this demand for the climate smart agricultural funds has exceeded expectations from USDA, and the backlog of farmers seeking assistance from USDA continues to grow. So the USDA spent over 99% of the money that they had allocated for 2023. And they're saying that they can continue to spend this huge and historic increase in conservation funding. So a few examples, EQIP, which is the Environmental Qualities Incentives Program, provides a cost share for farmers to implement practices. They received almost 9,000 applications in 2023. Of that, they only had money to fund 26% of those applications. So there was almost $500 million in applications, but only about $250 million available in funding. So farmers are going to USDA and saying, help us address climate change. And USDA is giving out all of the money that they have to do that. CSP is another example. This is the Conservation Stewardship Program that pays for kind of all of farm approaches to improving environmental outcomes. That only funded about 40% of applicants. And another great example is a program called RCPP, or the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which pays groups of farmers to address conservation concerns or environmental concerns that kind of cross property lines. So this is really key for watersheds and addressing water quality. RCPP received more than $2 billion in project proposals, but only had $250 million available in funding. So farmers are going and saying, we want this climate smart dollars. We want this climate smart money. So this set aside, right, means that more funds are then available as well for other practices. So climate smart funds can be met with the money in the guardrails, and money in the traditional conservation programs can fund other practices that farmers want, like wildfire management or irrigation. So it's kind of a win-win for farmers who are addressing climate as well as addressing other concerns that they might see on their farms. There's kind of this common talking point right now that from, I think, in particularly Republicans, and we mentioned G.T. Thompson's proposal, and this is his justification, that farmers don't want climate smart practices. They want to be able to spend on anything. But by removing the guardrails, we end up taking money away from all farmers because so much of it then is going to go towards structural and costly practices that don't do anything for the climate. We did do some modeling, and the concern, right, is that prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, only about 1/5 of USDA conservation dollars went to climate smart practices. So again, this is sending funds to farmers for things like really large scale irrigation practices that likely don't do anything to benefit the climate, or things that support factory farms. With the Inflation Reduction Act, that 1/5 number is closer to 70% of all conservation dollars going to climate smart agriculture, the things that us as taxpayers can see the most return on our investment. I mentioned cover crops. We used USDA data and looked at what a 15% reduction in cover crops would mean for the climate. So this is kind of a reasonable assumption based off of conservation funding. If we lowered cover crops by 15%, then using USDA data, that's an estimate of about 100,000 metric tons of emissions. And that's more than over 260 million miles driven by a passenger vehicle. And that's just one climate smart practice that could lose funding under the House Republicans' proposal. And that says nothing to do of, again, the other climate smart practices that are out there, like riparian buffers or creating habitat for wildlife. So this is all key and important to know that maintaining this money in climate smart means that we have more money available for all farmers, again, regardless of what they grow or what they raise and where they're located. So reducing emissions from farming isn't just critical to, again, avoiding climate catastrophe, it's also critical to avoiding a political catastrophe for agriculture. So unless farmers reduce industry's greenhouse gas emissions, agriculture could become the leading source of US emissions at more than 30% in the years to come. So that's why, again, to keep us on this path, we need to make sure that we keep these guardrails to keep us safe.
Thank you, Jeff. So we know how the Farm Bill can impact our climate goals, but the Farm Bill is much more than just climate and agriculture. is also focused on programs like SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is one of the Farm Bill's most important programs. In the 2018 Farm Bill, 70% of the Farm Bill went to funding SNAP. Now, as others have already mentioned, Republicans want to cut $30 billion from SNAP, reducing the amount of SNAP money for families during a period of record high inflation. SB, can you talk about the robust need for food security like SNAP programs?
Yes, absolutely. So let me give a little bit of information for those who might not be as familiar with SNAP. It is a program regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that was created for the purpose of aiding low-income families and individuals access healthy food options. Presently, more than 46 million Americans benefit from SNAP, with over 60% of its recipients being kids, seniors, or people living with disabilities. SNAP can be used at grocery stores, superstores such as Target and Walmart, farmers markets, which is a new initiative in the past few years, and even Amazon with Amazon Fresh. There is, of course, some differences between states in what is allowed for purchase, but SNAP eligible products mainly include fruits, vegetables, meat, poultry, fish, dairy, breads, cereals, non alcoholic beverages, snack foods, and seeds and plants that can grow food for users. SNAP additionally offers a variety of resources and opportunities outside financial support for healthy groceries. There are also employment and training programs that offer coaching towards education and employment goals. There's also WIC, which is Women, Infant, and Children programs that are available to SNAP recipients. And there is SNAP Ed that provides education on nutrition, budgeting, and dietary guidelines. It is essential that SNAP remains a supported program by the Farm Bill because it is currently the nation's most effective tool for fighting hunger. SNAP helps its recipients stretch their food budget while also promoting choosing healthier food options. The program is meant to respond to the needs of its recipients and offer extra help depending on the circumstances. For example, during COVID-19, Congress increased SNAP benefits under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act of 2020. This allowed states to allocate emergency allotments and increase each receiver's benefits to the maximum monthly amount, regardless of original allotment. The emergency allotments were revisited in 2021 to ensure that the lowest income households also saw an increase in benefits by at least $95. Those benefits have since been reduced, but at the time provided individuals with much needed financial relief. And as I already touched on briefly, SNAP is not only for food assistance, funding also goes towards employment and education initiatives that are particularly helpful in rural communities and can lead to long-term economic benefits. So protecting security, food security programs like SNAP is crucial as it addresses the widespread concern of inflation and rising grocery prices, offers essential food assistance, supports employment and training programs, and bolsters initiatives like WIC, ensuring comprehensive support in an uncertain economy, like you said, Quentin. So it's just really essential for a time when inflation is such a huge issue and concern for many Americans that it stays supporting those and helping stretch the food budget just a little bit more. And like I said, it's not, a complete solution, but for right now, it is our most effective tool for alleviating hunger in the United States.
Thank you, SB. Now to turn to our farmers. We're really excited to hear from our next two panelists. So Nika, you mentioned your community garden is based in Phoenix. What unique challenges do you face as a farmer there as you work to provide for your community? You're on mute.
My apologies. So yeah, just like everywhere else on the globe, we're all experiencing climate change, right? Where the planet is heating up. We're having more, environmental storms and things like that are happening across the planet. In Arizona particularly, we are experiencing rising temperatures on a regular basis. So last summer, for instance, we had 30 days of 110 plus degree temperatures, which is not usual here in the Valley. We are noticing every year, every summer, it is getting hotter and hotter. we're having less rain. So our monsoon seasons are getting shorter. Those are the times of the year where it's getting hot and we're expecting some type of moisture to come through and help us as we're growing food in the valley. That's not happening. We're expecting this year for us to have 110 plus temperatures for plus 30 days or plus. So more extended days of 110 degrees. So we have to adapt the way that we water, right? So that excludes top watering. That's drip systems on timers. That is building shade structures. That is planting things that are drought resistant. So it's limiting kind of like the types of food that we can grow for the amount of time that we have to grow them. So our summer season, a lot of times we're implementing cover crops. So you may see us planting black eyed peas and watermelon together. One helps feed the soil and the other helps feed the community. So through my work that I do as director of urban farms at St. Vincent de Paul, we're feeding the homeless and insecure families that come to us for meals. At the community gardens that I manage, we're feeding community members in that specific area and providing them with free produce. We're having to think of different things and think about what we're able to grow and when during these hot months. Now we do have a very good fall month, right? We're able to grow from October all the way up until about May. Those are cooler crops, which is great. Another thing that we're trying to do too is reduce the amount of inputs that we put into the garden. And so that is us thinking of organic ways to combat pests, whether that's hand picking or using little hand vacs to suck bugs off of things, because we're trying to reduce the amount of things that we're putting out into the air and into the food that we're eating and into the soil. We're doing no-till farm methods so that we're not disrupting the biodiversity within the soil. We are, again, putting up things like shade structures and things like that. So there are a lot of things that we're having to do right now in Arizona and the Valley in particular when it comes to how we grow foods. Recently, they talked about changing our zone. So we went from like a zone 9 to a zone 10A, which has us all thinking about what we're able to grow and when. So we're adjusting accordingly. And we're trying to think of ways to reduce our use of water, considering we're going through a drought, but also trying to keep our production going so that we can meet the needs of the individuals in our community that are the numbers that are increasing that are facing food insecurity. So for instance, when I first started at St. Vincent de Paul, we were feeding maybe about 1,000 people a day through our kitchens, right? And we were producing maybe about $1,000 or 1,000 pounds or so a year at our little community gardens to help with that. But the need has increased. So now we are feeding about 7,500 people a day through our kitchens. And we're increasing our production to now we're producing over 30,000 pounds of food a year to help contribute to that. And then we're also doing food rescue programs. So, and incorporating food waste into our composting as a way to build good soil and a way to help reduce any type of chemicals that we would use to help lift up our soil or build our soil. We're now using compost and food waste to do that. So, and then the funding from these different programs are the ones that are helping us implement this. And while I know that there's definitely a need for finances when it comes to hands and boots on the ground, the funding that we're getting from these different programs are helping us expand our outreach and also increase the program that we have around sustainable agriculture as a way to promote environmental stewardship and awareness and decrease food insecurity.
Thank you, Nika. We really appreciate you sharing your story and your experiences. Latoya, you described earlier you have a family farm that you started 4 years ago. Can you talk about some of the challenges you encounter as a first-time farmer when launching your family farm? You muted yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I think the biggest challenge is having the funds to continue to expand the farm. When we started from scratch. We had a local farm. KC Farm School is a woman-led farm that actually came and helped us and donated things to our farm. And so I think funds and people, volunteers helping is one of the challenges that we continue to kind of face. And the thing about the Farm Bill, because we are a small farm on 2 acres and we're an urban farm, that's one of the things that is not really spoken of in the Farm Bill. And then we're trying to get people to have more knowledge about it. The fact that we are still feeding people just like your 100-acre farms that grow as well. We're still feeding people in our community as well. So having people to understand what an urban farm is, having people to recognize that we need the same funds that the other farmers are getting, we need to be included in the Farm Bill. We need to be included, but also understand what our purpose is. We do a market every Wednesday with another farm. And one of the things, because food is getting so high nowadays, one of the things that they go by is pay what you can. Even though maybe all the vegetables that you have purchased is $20 and you don't have $20 to pay, you can pay $5. So having that flexibility, knowing where your farmers are, knowing what your farmers grow, and being involved. I think local food is so much better and for our community. So yeah, so the funds, having that available to us, being added into the Farm Bill as an urban farm, even though we're 2 acres and we're not like the big box farmers. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Latoya. Thank you for all the panelists for sharing your initial thoughts and experiences. But before we go into Q&A, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Gabby, with some next steps that you can take right now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby Walton. I'm the Federal Campaigns Associate here at the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And like Quentin mentioned, I want to give a huge thank you to our panelists who shared their wisdom, their knowledge, and their experiences with us. Your work is so important to the work that we're all trying to do here at CCAN and anybody who's fighting against the climate crisis to save our planet, save our health, save our well-being, and make sure that we lay down the foundation for a healthy, safe, and thriving future for future generations. So we've heard from our panelists all about, on the policy end, the importance of the IRA climate guardrails, the place of the Farm Bill in our fight against the climate crisis and in the climate movement. We've also heard on the ground the impact of the climate crisis and what challenges our farmers are facing that are or not be, or ideally will be addressed in this Farm Bill. So as we can see, the implications of this Farm Bill and its importance can't be understated. It is, essential for social well-being. It's essential for our social networks that will be one of our biggest assets against climate disaster and against shocks that come from the climate crisis. As Nika and Latoya mentioned, it's a means by which we can provide for each other and take care of one another. And having that community and that social network is essential in preserving our well-being, our health, and our safety, especially as these new and unpredicted climate shocks come and affect our daily lives. But at the same time, we have something that we can do, and that's by engaging our federal government and saying, this is what we need. We want to protect SNAP. We want to protect these climate guardrails. We like this money. It's clear that our farmers like this money, so that we can, lay the foundation for greater progress towards our climate goals and towards reducing emissions and making the agricultural sector not only more environmentally friendly, but also more resilient to extreme weather events like Nika mentioned, with extreme heat or flooding, shorter and abnormal weather patterns. So there's most certainly something we can do, and now is the time to really take that action. Now that we have these stories, this on the ground experience about what it's like to be a farmer right now, and coupling that with the policy side of things, of what the IRA's climate guardrails have been like, what the reception has been. So we're armed with, a great arsenal of information that we need to use to tell our elected officials, now is the time to ensure a climate smart and socially just farm bill. And on that end, I'd like to invite everyone to take a moment to send a message to their elected officials. And I'm sending the link in the chat right now where you can access this. It's a message template that outlines the importance of the climate smart guardrails, SNAP, and other priorities for the Farm Bill. And it takes only just a moment to fill it out with your information and send it to your elected official. So I'd like to invite everybody who's participating in this webinar to do so. And I also would invite you to comment in the chat, done, saying that you sent your message. And we're going to take this time and wait for 20 people to send their message to their elected official. And then after we've gotten those messages sent, we'll move on to our next section. So yeah, I'd really like to emphasize that this is a huge step that you can take to tell your lawmakers, this is what I know. I know that farmers like these programs. I've heard on the ground what people are going through, like Nika and Latoya, who are working and doing amazing work, providing for their communities as our producers. As not only our producers, but also our community members, the people who are providing for those who are struggling, just our everyday people who want to eat something that's going to nourish them and improve their daily lives. So we have that, and then we also have the policy side, understanding of what the importance of the Farm Bill is and where this fits in the overall picture of our climate goals. So with that in mind, I invite everyone to send a message to their elected officials. We'll take a couple of minutes and ideally get 15 to 20 messages sent. And just as a reminder, please comment in the chat. When you finish sending your message, it takes...
Hold on, Gabby. It seems like the chat is disabled.
That's disabled?
Yes, it is.
I see.
So I just shared it in the Q&A function, but we'll get the chat fixed, and then we'll drop it in there again. So while we're figuring that out, let's actually move on to some questions. And let's just start with the very first one, because I think it's really important. So just as today, the Washington Post had the headline that Congress is weighing delaying the Farm Bill over SNAP and climate disputes. I'll pass this to both Jeff and Matea. What are you hearing from both of your organizations? And what are you hearing?
Jeff, shall I take the lead and you follow up? All right, awesome, cool. Yeah, so I mean, the current Farm Bill has already been extended once, right? And that extension will expire on the 30th of this year. As folks probably know, the House Farm Bill text was marked up a couple of weeks ago, but it will be a while. We're anticipating it will be a while before it can go to the floor to vote. We'll also need to have it go over to the Senate. We've already seen, Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow's framework come out recently, and that was really exciting. We're also expecting Republican Senator John Boozman to release his fairly soon. All of this is to say, we don't actually, at least over at Evergreen, and Jeff, let me know if you've heard differently, we're not 100% sure when things are going to pass. It's really hard to crystal ball right now. We are anticipating that it will probably be around September, which isn't great. We've also heard that it could happen in the lame duck session after November, or it could happen after the election. Keep in mind, of course, that Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow will retire after the election. So we would have new Democratic leadership in the Senate, which would really change the dynamics. But Jeff, I bet I missed a bunch of things, so I'll throw it over to you for your intel too.
Now, you mentioned September, and we know that last year when the Farm Bill expired, they ended up doing a 1-year extension on some key programs. And they'll have to do an extension again, regardless of what happens, whether they pass a full Farm Bill or not. So that, again, is going to be another opportunity in September to continue to negotiate. We also know that all of this stuff, releasing frameworks, counter press releases and everything, that's all kind of posturing and negotiation at this point from Stabenow and G.T. Thompson on the Republican side. So really what's key now from an advocacy standpoint and making sure that, we're reaching out to members of Congress is because we want to give as much support to Debbie Stabenow's vision as possible, right? We want members of Congress to know that we're fighting for her proposal, for her framework, for the climate guardrails, for additional support for specialty crop growers, for protecting SNAP, for protecting state and local pesticide laws. All of these efforts, right? We want to make sure that, we're reaching out and we're giving as much support and loud and vocal support for Debbie Stabenow's vision so that as they're negotiating, as they're fighting over these proposals, that we give them as much kind of leverage as possible. It's also a key time because the House Farm Bill moved out of committee. It was marked up and passed on a vote 2 weeks ago. So if you're, kind of a rank and file member of Congress, right, you represent an area that maybe isn't involved, you're not on the Ag Committee, you represent, let's say my congressman here in Northern Virginia, right? He probably has not been paying attention to the Farm Bill at all. But now that it's out of committee, it means that he might have to start paying attention to this. So we want to make sure that we set the narrative right now and be clear and speak with one voice that these are our red lines, that members of Congress need to start paying attention, and they need to start with the climate guardrails.
Thank you, Matea and Jeff. Nakia, I think there's some interest in, you mentioned like cover crops, and you gave the example of black-eyed peas and watermelon. Do you have other examples of plants you grow together?
Absolutely. So, and I believe that was someone in Texas that asked that question. And so our our climate is pretty much similar. So during this time of year, you're going to be planting your black-eyed peas and your watermelon together, your okra and your sweet potatoes. You could do corn, beans, and squash together, which is considered the three sisters. Those do well in warm climates. Tomato and basil, peppers and marigolds, sunflowers and cucumbers, all of those grow together. Eggplant and amaranth, and of course your melons and beans, like I said earlier. So any of those can be grown together during the hot months, and they all should be able to weather the hottest time of the year if you have sufficient water set up for them.
Making me hungry.
Latoya, you mentioned, you're a first-time farmer. And so can you talk more about how the Farm Bill can support local farmers and first-time farmers in their effort to get into the agriculture space?
Yes. So a lot of the first-time farmers, some of us struggle with community education. And when I say community, I mean connecting with other small farmers, like-minded people, things of that nature. That can sometimes be a challenge. And again, like I said before, because I don't have 100 acres, growing on 100 acres, they really don't look at you as a farmer. But once you find community, it makes it a little bit easier. When years ago, I grew cucumbers, and the way I grew them, it was probably not the best way. So knowing what I know now, I would have did things differently. Knowing, and like Nika said, some of the things that you can pair together to grow together to yield more produce, just knowing the little things and having the community, having people to walk with you along the way, things of that nature. As far as being in the Farm Bill, I just think we're just as valuable as your big farmers. I've been saying that for the last couple of years. And being educated on how to get the grants for the smaller farmers is another thing. Some people are scared to go through the USDA to get grants because it can be so extensive when it comes to the paperwork. Just having that extra education. And I think that's kind of what's lacking right now. Some of the small farmers really don't know about the Farm Bill, and it's not that they don't care. They just don't, they're not educated enough on it. They don't have enough information. And I noticed when we went to go lobby last month in Washington, D.C., I just felt that some of the representatives didn't really understand what urban farmers were, what they do, how they operate, and the people that they feed. So that's a few things that, as far as the Farm Bill goes, yes.
Thank you, Latoya.
I would like to expand on that too, if possible.
Go ahead.
The Farm Bill also helps farmers in their process of taking their food from farm to market, right? It helps them get the tools that they need in order to set up at markets. It gives them tax incentives for the donations that they receive. They help them implement cover crop programs, composting and soil health initiative programs. There's investment in infrastructure in this bill, direct to consumer programs, again, like supporting farmers markets, the funding for SNAP, that not only benefits the people who use SNAP because it allows them to have access to fresh and nutritious food, but it also connects them directly to the community gardeners in their area or small farmers that are growing that food, because it opened up a way for small farmers like my sister here and myself to be able to sell at market to people. There was double up bucks that was added to that, where they could get twice as much produce for, like, you get $4 worth of produce for $2. There was a lot of things that were in the Farm Bill, or that are in the Farm Bill, that actually really helps smaller farmers like ours, and also helps us in creating initiatives around smart climate practices in order for us to save the planet.
Thank you. And just a quick update, we weren't able to re-enable the chat once the webinar started, but I see that a lot of you already were able to access the link through the Q&A function. And thank you for those who already sent your action alerts. And don't worry, after this, we're going to send an email with this video along with that link to send that email. And throughout the summer, we're going to have other opportunities to take action. So don't worry, this will be the first of many opportunities to weigh in on the Farm Bill. In our last few minutes, I want to make sure I get a question into Espy as well. Can you talk about how the climate crisis is impacting food access?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So yes, climate change is a major contributor to food access right now. It really starts at the agricultural level, impacting how our crops are grown, impacting specifically, also, I want to mention culturally appropriate food. I think it's really important to take note of that. I come from New Mexico, where our state crop is chili. It's something that I grew with my family growing up. And me and my mother would go and pick it in the farm with my grandfather and my grandmother. And so a huge thing that is impacting us at that level is water. It is becoming a really difficult to obtain water rights, and droughts are impacting our ability to grow fresh chili and culturally appropriate foods, that then leads into our ability to get that food into access such as superstores and grocery stores. And it continues down this snowball effect, I would say, of continuing to have delays on certain food that we're used to, delaying our fresh food. It's impacting our ability to have continuously fresh produce, or it's becoming moldy earlier, or it's getting frozen. And so, because of this snowballing effect, it's impacting our ability to purchase it at also a affordable, accessible rate. So it's continuing to just, yeah, snowball is the correct correct way. I want to continue to say that and emphasize, and which is why also I'm going to bring SNAP back in, that it's so important to continue to support stuff such as SNAP, programs such as SNAP, because with the prices climbing due to inflation because of our impact on agriculture from climate change, it's going to be harder to continue to get these fresh, healthy produce. And food access remains a huge strain on communities of color. So it's going to continue to be a thing that really demonstrates a difference between incomes and difference between groups that have access to food and that don't. And climate change is only going to continue to perpetuate it. So it just continues this cycle that starts at agriculture and continues on. And yeah, we need to be able to address that properly.
Well, I'm going to try to squeeze in one last question because I think this is actually a really important one as well. Jeff, you and I have actually talked about this in meetings that we've done together. A lot of we hear Republicans talking about reference pricing a lot and the need to sort of subsidize certain types of crops. Can you talk about that a little bit and how we need to push back against those efforts?
Sure. So one of the key parts of one of the subsidy programs is something called base acres. So in order to qualify for these subsidies, you need to have a certain amount of base acres showing historical farming over time. And if you think about USDA as an agency, if you think about where farming has been in this country and where USDA has been, in order to qualify for base acres, it's essentially the richest and wealthiest farmers. So it's the largest farms have the most base acres. So the largest farmers or agribusinesses get the most money. Our data shows that the 10% richest get about 72% of the subsidies. So how are they going to pay for all of these subsidies? And that's where the House Republicans are cutting money from SNAP, and they're cutting money from something called the Commodity Credit Corporation as well, that provides additional emergency assistance and additional funds from USDA in order to fund an increase in reference prices or the guaranteed prices that certain farmers get. And in order to get those guarantees, you have to grow essentially rice, cotton, and peanuts. So this is kind of this huge windfall of money where they're taking money from food assistance programs and giving it to the richest and wealthiest farmers in about 32 congressional districts in the Southeast. It's less than 100 counties in the Southeast. And this is all, again, happening in the backdrop of more than 4,000 Black farmers have gone out of business and stopped farming since the last USDA census. This is while they ignore funding or assistance for specialty crop growers, folks who are growing fruits and vegetables, things that people actually eat, instead to kind of boost the bottom line for some of these largest and richest companies really in the South.
Thank you, Jeff. That's the perfect place to end this. The chat is amazingly enabled again, so I dropped the link in for those who want to quickly click that and send that your action or your emails to your elected officials. But thank you, panel, for your amazing wisdom and experiences, sharing your experiences with us. And thank you, audience, for joining us. Take that action. We'll be following up with all this video, further actions, and all the materials that were covered. And we look forward to talking with more of you in the future. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.